21-year-old Alec Torelli, known as Traheho online, made his first World Series of Poker cash one to remember when he went heads-up versus Kenny Tran for the bracelet. After defeating 7 other opponents, he came up just short in his final matchup with Tran. But he still earned $337,000 for his excellent showing. And at his age, it's not like he's not going to have another chance to go on a bracelet run. Torelli also just started blogging for Card Player, and his first blog went live just recently. We interviewed Torelli and Tran about the final heads-up match in a video called Tran vs. Torelli, so we'll only briefly touch on that here. Today we're going to focus on heads-up strategy and what it takes to go deep in major live and online tournaments. All right, well, thanks a lot for doing this with us today, Alec.
No problem.
So first off, I know you've been talked to a lot about the heads-up tournament that you just came runner-up in. I mean, even by us, we just had an interview with you.
Right.
So I'm just going to kind of skim over that a little bit because there are still some stones that are unturned, and I know it's still fresh in your memory. So first off, who was your hardest opponent in those? Because you had 8 opponents throughout that entire time. So who was the hardest?
Yeah, we did 8 over 3 days. So it was a lot of different opponents with different styles. I found when I say it's my hardest, it's just because I think our styles match up the worst for me. Perhaps other people would play better against this opponent if they were like more aggressive or if their styles just matched out differently. I thought my 4th opponent was the toughest. I think his name was Flawless Victory Online. And I don't remember his real name. He was 25, and we'd played online before. His name's Scorpion Wins on Full Tilt, and he gave me a really tough time. I mean, he came out firing the whole time, and he would re-raise a lot, and he just put a lot of pressure on me, and it just didn't match up too well for me. I had to make some adjustments, and I made a big value bet, which worked really well for me, and then I made a big call in the end, and I was like 45% to win, and I won, and it wasn't for that many chips, but. It was really tough, and if I didn't get in that spot, I really think he would have beat me. And I mean, even if we ran the match a couple more times, I think he might have beat me. So.
Okay. Well, so you said that your styles conflicted a little bit more than most other people. What is your style in particular, and how does his style conflict with that specifically?
Good question. He plays really fast and really aggressive. He was re-raising me a lot, and he's betting every flop. And our styles play like we play similarly. But when someone plays similarly like that, it's just the person that plays more dominant is going to have more pressure. And of course, like single elimination, you want to. It's not like you don't want to take risks or take gambles, but you much rather play someone that's just slow and passive because you could just grind them down, and then you end up having 80% of the chips. They have 20, and then you could take a bunch of gambles because if you lose, you're right back to even, and then you grind them down again and whatever. But he definitely wasn't going to let me do that. And he was forcing me to play big pots, make tough decisions, and it was going to come down to one of us making a big play at the other, and possibly even getting an all-in on a flip situation, which obviously isn't what you want in these single elimination tournaments,
Right.
Excuse me. So he made it really tough for me. He played great, and was fortunate to get the best of it. So.
Okay. Well, and speaking of taking gambles, obviously the final hand of your final match with Kenny Tran took a gamble. I mean, he ended up calling, I think it was calling your all-in with just a draw.
Yeah.
And if you were in that same situation where you were one up on him and you had the chip lead, would you take that same gamble, or is your game just completely different and you'd try to ride it out until you found a better spot?
No, I'd definitely go with his spot there. I mean, he had a great spot, actually. I mean, I hadn't been check raising him too much on flops, so I mean, he could easily put me on a draw too. When I check raised, it was like Queen 7-4, 2 clubs. I mean, it's hard. I mean, I either have a big queen, set's really unlikely, 2 pairs unlikely on that board, or I have a draw. And if I have a draw, I mean, he has me dead. So, I mean, he could even have the best hand a lot of the times. And I check raised him to 400,000. He made it $1 million. He's getting like 3-1 on his call, and he has the nut flush draw. He's only 40% against my hand. It's an easy call in that spot. And like you said, he's up 1 match to 0. He's free rolling on the match, and he knew I was playing a lot different the second match. I changed my game up a lot. I was winning a lot more pots. I think I was dominating the match a little bit as opposed to the first one where he was beating me pretty bad. And I think he realized, this is the best spot he's going to get against me, and he needed to take it, especially because, like you said, he's free rolling on the match. So, but like I said, he could have the best hand a lot too. I mean, I could have a lot of worse draws, like a straight draw and a flush draw, but he's way ahead of that. So it's not a bad spot for him, and he got the best of it.
Okay. And well, it's like you said that you were kind of dominating him in the final match, so maybe he decided to take the gamble because he knew that he wasn't ahead as far as playing in that last match.
He was getting a little bit frustrated. The first match, he was just like, I looked at the stats, he won 68% of the pots. And I mean, he didn't need to take spots like that. He could just beat me out of small pots. Like he said, he just grind me down a little bit, and then finally we got it all in an end. And, that was only for like 60% of the chips. But if I would have won that last hand, then he still would have had a good chance to win the match. So, but in this spot, it was completely different. I came out raising every button. I bet every flop. I was check raising him on a little bit here and there and making some moves. And that spot was good for him because the tempo of the match was completely different. And when you have two aggressive opponents, like I said, you need to get it all in at some point.
Okay. Well, and that actually brings up another point. You said that the tempo of the match was such that it made sense. Is there any credibility to the idea of having momentum in a heads-up match, or is that all just kind of a mental thing?
No, I'm both. Both actually. It's good for you and bad for them. So it's twice as good for you. It's like having a swing. Like if you were going to win 2K and then you ended up losing 2K, it's a 4K swing, right? It's the same sort of thing because like if you're playing well, you could see the frustration on their face. In a few hands, he would fold and just be like, "God damn, I missed another flop," and you could just see it because you're in every hand. It's hard not to show emotion. Whereas in a full ring game, it's like you're supposed to fold every hand. You're supposed to lose hands. So when you show emotion, it's okay because it's not as bad because you're not going to play a hand for a while. But heads up, you could see it and you could really see it like each pot affecting each player. And so when you get a lot of momentum built up, it's just they feel like you're left there feeling like you're doing something wrong or that you can't win, and then eventually it just spiral downward, and that's ends up what's happening a lot of the times.
Okay. And as far as heads up is concerned, in a full ring game, for instance, a short stack is usually considered somewhere between 10 and 15 big blinds. Is that different in heads up? Is a bigger stack considered a short stack in heads up just because there's so much more action and so much more play?
No, I'd say it's about the same. I mean, I think the hand requirements are different. I mean, the situation's different, and you got to adjust differently because obviously there's only 2 players dealt in instead of 9, so you can't be playing. You have to be playing hands you wouldn't be playing in a 9-handed game if you have the same stack, obviously, because you're just 2 people. But I think the general strategy would be the same, aside from the hand requirements. And
okay. Well, the general strategy is usually in that kind of range. It's usually by push fold.
Yeah.
So.
And also learning what ranges to call with if he's pushing on you. Because if you have 10 big blinds and he's raising all in, you got to learn what to call with, depending on your opponent. Okay. So, yeah.
So considering that your hand ranges are so much wider and that the 10 to 15 big blind range is still push fold, what kind of hands do you see yourself pushing all in with? I mean, is it bluffs a lot of the time?
Yeah. Well, I think that's very player dependent. I was playing against Lyle Berman with 8 left, so my 6th match. And against him it would be a lot different than other people. He would fold a lot more than other people would in that situation. So you're going to open up your range a little bit because you're going to be able to take advantage of him making incorrect folds with stacks that he should be calling with.
Right. And
also other players might shove too lightly. Like they might just shove every hand because they think you're going to fold. And then obviously you have to adjust to open up your calling range. In my 4th match versus Flawless Victory, I remember I raised on the button like. He had 20 big blinds, so say it was like 501K, and I made it like 2K, and he shoved for 18K. He actually had 18 big blinds. He shoved for 18K, and I thought that he was going to shove a wider range than he should, and I thought he thought I was going to fold most of the time. I thought he didn't think I was going to make a big call on him, and I called with King 10 of spades. If he's shoving like 80% of his hands, and my hands maybe like 58% against his hand, and with all the dead money in the pot, then I thought it was a good call, and he ended up having ace-jack. So I guess I'll never know if he was shoving lightly there, but that's part of adjusting, just trying to figure out what they're going to do and what they think about your image, and then go from there.
Okay. Well, in heads-up matches, what patterns and tells are you looking for to try to determine how to play against a certain opponent?
Betting patterns, I think, are one of the most important. Physical tells, I mean, sometimes I don't know if in the 10K too many people give off that much in a big event like this. I picked up some because. In some small pots, like, you limp in the button and then, you have 100 big blinds and then they think the pot doesn't matter, so they'll just be like, oh, I check, and then, it's kind of obvious that they have nothing. But as far as big pots, I don't think that really ever comes up with any of these players, that they're going to give anything away. But betting patterns is really important. If people are going to value bet their marginal hands, that's a really important thing to know. If they're going to value bet marginal hands, it makes it really hard to play against, because then they could either be bluffing, value betting, or having a big hand. Whereas some people, like I found against Lyle, he wouldn't value bet marginal hands. So when he would bet the river, it would either be like I made a huge hand or I'm bluffing. It just really polarizes their range, which means like it's either, the side A or side B. Mm-hmm. It's just one thing or the other, which makes it a lot easier to play against because it's just there's less combinations of hands they could have.
Right.
So that's really important to notice, and that's probably I'd say the most important thing to pick up. And it helps pick it up early on because you could adjust your play accordingly.
Well, if it helps to pick it up early on, then are you making a lot more kind of loose calls on the river just to see what they have, even if you don't think you can win?
Yeah, usually. Like against Lyle, I called a huge bet on the river with like third or fourth pair, and he had a set, and I was like, oh. I mean, I thought he was either bluffing or he had a huge hand, and then the next time I checked, and he checked down top pair against me, and I was like, shit, I made the wrong call, because it was obvious he wasn't going to value bet top pair there, so I was like, okay, well then my call was really bad, but now I know that, and I knew not to value bet marginal hands against him, because he was only going to call with better, and he was going to make big folds to me, because he played a really tight style, and so I learned that early, and I was able to capitalize on it.
Okay. Well, in heads-up tournaments in general, are there any philosophies that you kind of adhere to throughout?
Not really. Well, this is one of my first heads-up tournaments. I play a lot of heads-up cash games, some heads-up sit-and-goes and stuff, but as far as tournament structures, this is one of the first ones. But in heads-up cash or in this event, there's nothing really I stuck to. I just said I was going to play my best, and I had a bet with Mark Voss. I really wanted to win, that I'd win a bracelet, so that kind of gave me some confidence and some motivation. And, yeah, I don't really like to lose bets, so I just try to think about that every time I was in a big decision, take a few deep breaths, and then that's it.
Okay, sounds good. Well, at 21, you're still relatively green to live poker tournaments. I mean, you've played quite a few overseas and stuff like that,
right.
But are there still any adjustments that you're needing to make to live tournaments, or what were the adjustments that you needed to make when you first started playing them?
I started playing my first one when I was like 18 or 19, which is when I was pretty new to poker. So I've been constantly making adjustments to my live game. I think it's a lot different than online in some different aspects. And mainly it's just patience, because you're not seeing as many hands. And sometimes in the World Series events, it's 10-handed instead of 9, and you need to make some adjustments and play a little tighter from early position. And it's hard to do that, especially when you're having a bad day. You lose a few tournaments in a row, and your table's really weak, and you want to play hands against them, and then you convince yourself to open in marginal spots, and it hurts you. And for me, it's just patience, and it's just waiting for good spots. And sometimes you know what the right decision is. It's hard to make it because it's just so boring sometimes. And for me, that's the hardest thing. I'm pretty sure if you ask most players, especially young online players, they'd probably say the same thing.
Patience,
so,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's it.
In that case, then, is it easier to play online, or are there some offsetting factors for playing in live events that make it easier to play live?
Let's see. How about this? If you're playing your best, it's easier to play live. Like, if you could play your same game online as you could play live, then it would be 100 times easier to play live, just because the field's worse, and other players are giving off more physical reads than you would be, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen of the online players and what I've seen of some of the just regular live players. Not regular live players, but just people in the tournament that just come in for the weekend to play. And but it's just that playing that A game is so hard to do live, just because you're not used to it. You don't do it every day. And online, it's just easy. You could eat a banana, sit on your computer, watch TV, and play Xbox. You can do anything while playing online.
You probably shouldn't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, but you could keep entertained. So it's a lot easier to play your best game online, and that's the biggest factor for me, and I think for most people.
Okay. Well, your biggest online score, obviously, as you know, is when you took down an F-Tops event. It was a little bit over a year ago. You made $300K for it, and that's a very, very different event from the one from the heads-up event you just came runner-up in. It had obviously a much smaller buy-in. It had a much bigger field. It probably had a softer field. I mean,
completely opposite ends of the spectrum.
How differently? How do you play that kind of event? How do you do well in that kind of event?
You mean online, or just like a bigger event with a bigger buy-in?
I mean everything that's different about that event. What makes it different? What different tactics do you take because of how different it is?
Right. Okay. Well, definitely because you're playing online and you're playing a full ring game. You got to play more carefully. You got to play less hands. You got to wait for more spots. You obviously can't see anybody, so you got to go more on just your hand values, and there's less to pick up from looking at someone. And in events like that, in the beginning you don't know exactly how everyone's playing. Like when you're at a table in a live game, you could sit around and see, okay, this guy's this age and has headphones, and this guy doesn't, and this guy told me he won a satellite here, and this guy, you could tell what type of players are what, and get a general feel for how good they are based on with a half hour of play and not playing too many hands. But online, you really gotta pay attention. You really gotta see who's playing what hands, how they're playing hands, look at the hand histories, and if you're doing multiple things, you're not going to play optimally in those.
Well, and you're always doing multiple things
Right.
usually because you're always at least playing 2 or 3 tournaments.
Yeah, of course.
Most
Especially on
online
like a big day like Sunday. I remember I was in Australia and I got up early to play that event, and I was doing a few things. Especially it was like I got up like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning Australian time to play. I was like kind of hungover and I didn't feel like playing, and
So the situation was optimal to play in a big tournament.
Optimal poker situation, obviously. And I had my roommate like grab me food like when he got up, and then ended up getting pretty deep, and I started focusing later on, and it worked out for me. But I mean, you really got to pay attention to how the people are playing. And when it got late, I remember I just shut all my tables, and I was like, I really want to focus on this. And I opened up a few of the other tables I wasn't playing in to see how they were playing in the event that I did get to the final table, and played with players that I hadn't played with before. Kind of see who was like, just spewing chips, and who was really solid, and who was tight, who was going to make moves on you. And that really helps to do online because, live you could just stand up and look around and see them or ask other people. But online, you really got to be paying attention to get that extra information, which oftentimes is going to make the difference.
Right. Okay. Well, in any given hand, then, what kind of mental checklist do you go over to determine how to act in every single situation?
Well, first, generally, is it going to be, is this hand profitable to play from this position, depending on where you are. Also, another really important thing is who's behind you, whether you're in a tournament or a cash game, especially. Like, who's behind you? You mean left to act before the blinds, or including the blinds? Are they going to re-raise you a lot? Are they going to call you a lot? And then how they're going to play on the flop versus you too? Are they just like calling stations? Should you bet the flop versus them if they're just going to call you down with anything? A lot of times it's better just to give up than continuation bet, even though most of the time you should continuation bet. But sometimes against players that like are just going to call you, they're going to make moves against you. You got to know how to act and react versus them. So that's really important to factor in. And I'd say those are the most important things. But before the hand, at least, and during the hand, obviously there's other things taken into consideration. But before you open with any 2 cards, and that's it's the most important thing to look at.
Well, and actually, kind of speaking about that too, it's kind of become the general philosophy, or it became the general philosophy a little while ago, that if you're going to be in a hand, you should be raising pre-flop. You should be open and raising
Right.
with the hand. Do you adhere to that philosophy, or do you think it's kind of not really that important and that you just play it by feel every single time?
I generally think that's the way to go. I would say I agree with that. But as far as betting the flop after you raise, a lot of times that's just like people just kind of like close their eyes and bet the flop. And I think that's a time where you could really make alterations and look at the situation, and every situation is unique in that respect. Like I said, like if someone's behind you and they're going to call you on the flop, or you look at them and you just tell they're going to call you, or the flop texture is like something where it hit a lot of the hands that they called with pre-flop. Like if you assume they called with a certain type of hand pre-flop and the flop came to where it matches up with the cards they called with, I mean, it's more optimal to check fold in those spots, or maybe to check with a big hand. If they check the flop and they're going to check fold, maybe just to check it back with a big hand and let them bluff 2 streets against you. I mean, there's times where just betting every flop that you raise pre-flop with is an optimal situation. But as far as pre-flop goes, I would say raising is definitely optimal. And in maybe like 90% of the situations, sometimes extreme situations, I would limp. If I knew the guy behind me was going to like just shove all in with 10 big blinds, try to get someone else to call if I had a big hand. But only if I knew that they wouldn't know what I was doing when I limped in. So, okay. I don't know.
Well, what about when people have already started limping in? I mean, the more people that limp, the easier it is to just call rather than open, right? Or is that not the case? That it's more likely that you should raise to thin the field and get position with dead money in the pot.
Well, a few things I'd factor in that situation. One would be the types of players that limped. If they're capable of limping with big hands, obviously it's more of a case to just call because you don't want to get limp re-raised or shut out or trapped. The second thing I'd take into consideration is what position they limped from. If they limped from early position, I generally consider the strength of their hand to be stronger because they have to factor in that all the other players behind them have to act in the hand. So therefore, there's a chance someone might raise behind them, and they must know this, so they have to limp in with a generally bigger hand. And the third thing is the value of my hand and how well it plays post-flop versus either A, a lot of people's hands, or B, just isolated with one hand. Like, for example, if I have, like pocket threes or something and there's 4 limps, I don't really want to raise. I mean, sometimes if we're deeper stacked and I think that they have a stronger hand, I'm not going to raise. I just want to limp in and try to bust someone that limped with a big hand and flop a set. Whereas if I have a hand like ace, queen of spades, I might want to isolate against one opponent, try to flop a queen, hope they have king, queen. and then try to bust them. Because if I limp in and someone flops this, like, you know, there's 5 ways to the flop, and I flop a big pair, I mean, I don't know where I'm at. There's too many people to weed through. Right. So it depends on your hand and their hand, and also the other 2 things I said about the position and the types of players that limped in.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things to factor in that spot. It's really hard to just say, I would do one thing.
Right, exactly.
But that's generally the 3 guidelines I'd consider, and then I'd go from there.
Okay, sounds good. Well, the last question I have for you is, I'm sure there are a lot of viewers right now that are kind of aspiring to become full-time poker pros. What's the best getting started advice that you can give for someone like that?
Oh, wow. I don't know. Don't.
Don't.
No, I'm just kidding.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. Man, you have to really want to do it. You have to not, I mean, you have to really want to just play poker. You have to want to just win. You have to be upset if you get second for $300,000 and win in a heads-up event. Like, if you're happy that you got second.
As a random example.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as a prime example, honestly, if you're happy that you got second and because you made $300,000, then poker's not for you. I mean, if you're upset that you got second because you wanted to win and you don't realize about the money till later, then you have a shot. I mean, you have to really just want it. You have to have heart. And you have to, I mean, obviously you have to work at it. You have to practice. You have to do your homework. You have to study hands, talk to people. And that's a given. You know, it's the same with any sport. But, you know, I mean, I don't think Kobe's too happy right now that he got second place, even though he's getting paid $50 million a year. And if you have that attitude towards poker where you just want to make money and you think it's an easy way to make money, then you're in for a rude awakening, I think.
Go play limit cash games.
Yeah, I mean, stay in school, I guess, the best thing to say, I don't know. But that's my advice, for sure.
Okay.
That's it.
Well, thanks a lot for doing this interview with us. I really appreciate you coming in.
Yep, anytime.
And thank you guys for watching The Online Zone on Card Player TV.